Have you ever walked into a room where everyone seems to know their role? Everyone has their spotlight, and somehow your only part is to stay invisible? Some of you know exactly what I mean. The way silence can be louder than words, how laughter at your expense can sting years later, and how family can sometimes feel like the toughest crowd you'll ever face. Imagine spending your whole life standing in the shadows of someone else's glow, only to discover that the very stage they mock you from is one you secretly own. Tonight, I'm going to tell you how that happened to me, but not with bitterness, not even with revenge in my heart, because what I learned is that the sweetest victories aren't loud. They are quiet, steady, and undeniable. And in those moments, when the world finally realizes what you've become, all you need to do is smile. Quick reminder, most of you aren't subscribed. If you enjoy this, hit subscribe and like now, then let's get back to the story. My name is Marissa Lane. I'm 34 years old, though life forced me to grow strong long before that. Last month, at my father's 60th birthday dinner in a high-end Italian restaurant in Charleston, my older sister embarrassed me the way she always has. She raised her glass and announced to everyone that her rent was going up to $700. Then, she smirked at me and said it was probably more than I made in a whole month, running my little real estate business. The table erupted in laughter. My parents didn't join in, but they didn't stop it either. They didn't defend me, didn't even look my way. Their silence said enough. What none of them knew, not even my sister, was that the very building she was mocking me about, the one with the rooftop pool and concierge, actually belonged to me. I was her landlord, and had been for more than a year. Before I tell you how I turned the tables and everything changed, you need to know where I came from. Because this isn't just a story about buildings or money, it's a story about family, identity, and refusing to stay invisible when others try to make you feel small. I grew up just outside Providence, in the kind of neighborhood where maple trees shaded tidy sidewalks, and every lawn was cut with meticulous care. To outsiders, we looked like a happy middle-class family living in a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a cheerful red door. To friends from school, my home was idyllic, but inside those walls lived an entirely different reality, one where I, the second daughter of Martin and Elise Hart, learned quickly that I would never be the star. That role already belonged to my older sister, Clarissa. Clarissa, 5 years ahead of me, was the golden child. She was the kind of girl who seemed to shine brighter by accident. Straight A's without effort, homecoming queen without campaigning, a debate team captain who could silence an opponent with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. My parents made sure her accomplishments were celebrated, documented, and displayed like museum artifacts. Every shelf, every framed photo, every corner of our living room screamed her perfection. Her trophies, her awards, her smiling portraits at every age. You couldn't take 3 steps without tripping over evidence of Clarissa's extraordinary life. And me? Well, if you ask my parents, I was capable. That was the word they used, though it carried about as much warmth as cold porcelain. When I brought home a report card filled with B+s, they said things like, "If only you'd apply yourself like your sister. Imagine what you could be." If I earned second place at the science fair, the project would sit, half forgotten on the dining table for a day or two, before it was shuffled to storage. When Clarissa won first place, Dad built her a shelf right by the front door so that every visitor would see it immediately. Even our birthdays were unequal. Clarissa's were elaborate productions with hired entertainers, bakers, decorations, and massive guest lists. On my 12th birthday, my mother ordered a last-minute sheet cake from the grocery store after nearly forgetting. Dad arrived late and distracted. By the time I blew out my candles, Clarissa was already stealing the spotlight by gushing about an upcoming school dance. It wasn't malicious. It was simply the air we breathed. Clarissa was extraordinary. And I was there. I learned early that competing for my parents' approval was futile. So I developed another survival tactic: silence. Silence can be powerful. It teaches you to observe, to adapt, to grow strong in places no one bothers to look. Silence sharpens you. It forces you to build an internal foundation so solid, so unshakable, that when no one claps for you, you learn to clap for yourself. That was my training ground. Not applause, not gold stars, but resilience. Our father, Martin, was an accountant for a prestigious firm. The kind of man who favored numbers over emotions, whose face remained unreadable no matter the occasion. Our mother, Elise, was a school administrator at the same high school Clarissa attended. Imagine the perfect arrangement. A mother on staff to witness and celebrate every shining moment of her shining daughter. Together they were a social force, organizing fundraisers, hosting dinner parties, adored by the community. And always, Clarissa stood in the center of it all. I stood slightly outside the frame. But outside the frame gave me a vantage point no one expected. While they were watching her, I was watching the world. I was learning, absorbing, preparing. Though none of us knew it then, those lessons would one day shift the balance of everything. Because while Clarissa mastered applause, I mastered resilience. And one day, resilience would prove much harder to break. When I think back to my childhood, I don't remember a lack of food on the table or clothes to wear. On the outside, everything looked fine. We lived in a tidy 2-story colonial, in a quiet Providence suburb, where neighbors waved at each other from freshly cut lawns, and children rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. But the walls of that house held a different truth. One where love and attention weren't shared equally, where one child basked in the glow, and the other quietly learned to exist in the shadows. Clarissa, my older sister, was born 5 years before me, and from the moment I can remember, she was perfection personified. Her smile lit up every room. Her grades were flawless, her trophies sparkled across every mantle, and she seemed to glide effortlessly from one accomplishment to the next. Clarissa wasn't just good at things, she was extraordinary. She wore her crown of superiority naturally, as if the universe itself had decided she was destined for golden light. And then there was me. I wasn't a failure, not by any means. My grades were solid, my personality curious and driven, my spirit strong. But compared to my sister's shining glow, my efforts seemed forgettable. When I brought home a B+ report card, my parents nodded and told me I could do better if I worked harder, like your sister. When I won 2nd place in a 7th grade science fair, my project sat briefly on the dining room table before being swept into storage. Meanwhile, when Clarissa had won 1st place years earlier, my father built a custom shelf by the front entrance so visitors would see her display the moment they stepped into our home. Our living room walls weren't walls at all. They were shrines to my sister. Debate trophies gleamed under perfect lighting. Newspaper clippings about Clarissa's academic competitions were framed and hung neatly in rows. Photos of her smiling in honor cords and sashes captured each milestone, carefully curated and displayed with pride. And where was I in these exhibits of family glory? A blurry school photo tucked into the corner of the piano mirror, occasionally updated, rarely noticed. My victories never made it higher than a shelf in the basement storage room, even birthdays, supposedly. The one day where each child should feel equally celebrated, were reminders of the hierarchy in our household. Clarissa's birthdays were grand occasions. My parents spared no expense. Balloon arches, custom cakes with glittering designs, a rented hall or a backyard packed with friends and catered food. For my 12th birthday, Mom forgot to order my cake until the very last minute. Dad was too busy at work and only showed up for the final half hour. I blew out candles on a plain sheet cake from the grocery store, the cheap kind with thick, waxy frosting, while Clarissa basked in everyone's attention as they teased her about her upcoming school dance. I smiled through it all, but deep down, I understood. My existence in this family was secondary. I learned an important truth early. Competing against Clarissa for recognition was a losing battle. Instead of fighting it, I forged a new path. I built my value internally. I stopped depending on their approval. Every success of mine became mine alone, privately held, privately celebrated. When Dad didn't have time to teach me how to change a tire because he was busy prepping Clarissa for a big college interview, I figured it out myself in the driveway, hands black with grease. When Mom failed to show up to my debate meet, but later posted about Clarissa's minor law internship on Facebook, I clapped for myself in the mirror. It wasn't easy, but slowly I learned resilience. That resilience guided me through high school and straight into the brutal years of college decisions, a time when favoritism became impossible for even outsiders to ignore. Clarissa set the bar, as always. She was accepted into an Ivy League law program on a partial scholarship, and my parents threw her a massive celebration. They took out a loan to cover her remaining tuition, and proudly announced that it was an investment in her future. For me, when my acceptance letter came in from Rhode Island State University for business administration. My mother simply said, "At least it's affordable." My father slid a student loan application across the dinner table without blinking. "So you want me to pay for my own degree?" I asked, trying to mask the sting in my voice. "We helped your sister because law school is expensive," Dad replied coolly. "But business administration is different. It'll teach you financial responsibility to do it yourself." That's how my college years began, with 3 jobs stacked onto my shoulders. In the mornings, I poured coffee in a sleepy cafe near campus. In the evenings, I waited tables at a chaotic Italian restaurant downtown, balancing trays heavier than I was. And on weekends, I worked for a small property management office, filing paperwork, answering calls, and occasionally listening in on conversations that weren't meant for me. That weekend job changed everything. The owner, an older man named Richard, was brusque but fair. Unlike most adults who dismissed me as just a college kid, Richard noticed that I paid attention. I watched as he negotiated contracts with tenants, handled maintenance emergencies, and studied expense sheets. One afternoon, I caught what looked like a double-billed utility charge on one of the properties. Richard reviewed it, frowned, and made one phone call that saved him thousands. He sat back in his creaky office chair and looked at me differently that day. "You've got good instincts," he said simply. "Most people look at a building and see walls. You see potential. Don't lose that." Those words lodged themselves deep inside me. I carried them into long nights of studying and double shifts at work, whispering them to myself whenever exhaustion made me doubt. While Clarissa sent home stories about law school galas and dinners with judges, I was sitting in a dusty back office, absorbing the kind of education no textbook could offer. Real estate wasn't glamorous then. It was utility bills, leaky pipes, grumpy tenants, and vendor contracts. But to me, it was power. It was possibility. And for the first time, I felt like someone, just one person, saw me. Not as Clarissa's sister. Not as the capable but lesser child. Just me. By the time I finished my business degree, exhaustion was wired into me like a second heartbeat, but so was determination. My sister graduated into a prestigious law firm in Boston, complete with designer suits and glowing parental approval. I walked across that stage in an affordable gown, clutching a degree I knew I had paid for myself, fully aware that my parents thought I had taken the easier road. But deep down, I'd started to sense something they hadn't. I was walking a different road entirely. And while they were obsessed with status, I was quietly learning how to build something far more powerful than applause, something permanent, something no one could ever take away. Graduation felt less like an ending and more like standing at the bottom of a steep mountain with nothing but my bare hands to climb it. Clarissa had her golden ticket, her prestigious law firm job downtown in Boston, complete with a salary that made our parents beam at every dinner table. She posted pictures of her office window overlooking the city skyline and boasted about happy hour with partners whose shoes probably cost more than my monthly rent. My parents shared those photos with every friend they had, bragging as though her achievements were their own badges of honor. Me? I packed up my thrift store couch and hand-me-down dishes into a rusted sedan and drove to my first apartment, a studio on the 3rd floor of a crumbling brick building in a less-than-charming part of Providence. The shared hallway smelled perpetually of fried food and mildew, and the elevator worked only when it felt like it. My neighbors included a nurse who worked overnight shifts, a guitarist whose late-night practice rattled the walls, and an elderly man who stacked newspapers to the ceiling of his unit. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And best of all, the rent was low enough that I could stash away a portion of each paycheck. I had landed an administrative job at a mid-sized real estate brokerage downtown. At first glance, the role sounded uninspiring. I answered phones, typed contracts, scheduled client meetings, and shuffled paperwork across desks that smelled faintly of ink and stale coffee. But I didn't complain, not once. Every file I handled taught me something. How leases were structured, how zoning laws worked, how mistakes on paperwork could cost thousands. Where other assistants saw drudgery, I saw blueprints for the future I longed to build. Still, I craved something beyond observation. That's when Richard, my old weekend boss from college, introduced me to someone who would alter the course of my life forever. Her name was Evelyn Kane. She was 68 at the time, sharp-eyed, well-dressed in classic tailored suits, and decades ahead of everyone else in her industry. Evelyn owned multiple commercial buildings across the city, offices, warehouses, a strip of retail shops on the east side. She carried herself with the authority of someone who'd fought battles no one cared to ask about. Her reputation was ironclad, yet there was a kindness behind her voice when she first shook my hand. "I hear you've been pestering Richard for spreadsheets and contracts," she said with a wry smile. "Most 20-somethings I know are too busy pestering bartenders. Which one are you, Marissa?" "The one who likes spreadsheets," I answered before I had time to second-guess my blunt honesty. Her laugh was short, but genuine. "Good. I might have a place for you." And that's how it began. Within weeks, I was shadowing Evelyn on her site visits. She didn't coddle me with sugar-coated explanations either. She dragged me straight into the mess. Late contractors, leaking roofs, budget shortfalls, and tenants threatening lawsuits. But she also showed me how to turn those crises into opportunities. I watched her negotiate renovations that doubled a building's rental value, spotted how she transformed raw potential into actual profit. Watching her at work was like watching a master sculptor carve beauty out of stone, except instead of marble, she shaped neighborhoods. "You've got two choices in this business," Evelyn told me one late night as we went over rental income sheets in her office. Outside, the city hummed under its street lamps. "You can play small and survive paycheck to paycheck, or you can play smart and build something that'll outlive you. Which one are you planning to be?" "Smart," I answered without hesitation. Her gaze fixed on me with an intensity I'll never forget. "Then don't let anyone talk you out of it. Not your family, not society, not yourself. People will doubt you more than they'll doubt a man, and when they see you succeed anyway, they'll pretend they always believed in you. So remember who you're doing this for." Her words hit me like lightning. For the first time, someone wasn't just noticing. They were taking me seriously. It wasn't long before that first opportunity came, knocking, a rundown duplex in a neighborhood everyone whispered was up and coming hit the market. The paint was peeling, the roof sagged, and the carpet smelled like mold. But when I stepped inside, my heart raced. I didn't just see decay. I saw what could be. I saw polished hardwood floors. I saw light pouring through cleaned windows. I saw families making memories. I saw potential. The asking price was terrifying. My hands literally trembled as I flipped through the financing options, but Evelyn urged me forward. "You've saved for years. This is that moment. If you keep waiting for perfect, you'll be waiting forever." So I scraped together every dollar of savings, signed my name on a mortgage contract that made me nauseous just to look at, and walked out of that bank with keys in my hand. The reality of being a landlord hit fast. That duplex was no dream. It was a nightmare of patchy drywall, leaking faucets, outdated wiring, and tenants who weren't sure I had the faintest clue what I was doing. And truthfully, I didn't. I had to learn everything. I watched online tutorials at 2 a.m. on how to retile bathrooms. I wandered hardware stores asking endless questions, hauling paint cans until my arms ached. My weekends disappeared into sanding floors, patching walls, and battling roaches that refused eviction. But slowly, steadily, the house transformed. A fresh ceiling replaced water stains. Golden light reflected off restored hardwood. Room by room, sweat by sweat, it reshaped into something livable. And more than livable, desirable. When I finally listed those units, my nerves nearly cracked. Who would trust a first-time landlord to provide a decent home? Then one evening, a young couple with steady jobs signed a 2-year lease, shaking my hand like I was someone legitimate. The first rent check cleared, covering the mortgage and leaving me with a small surplus, a profit. I stood in that duplex living room with my hands pressed against the walls, tears running down my face. For once, I didn't crave anyone's applause, not even my parents. The building applauded me with every rented room. When I shared the news at the next holiday dinner, my father frowned across the table. "Rental property is a headache and a liability," he muttered. "You might have been better off with a retirement account." My mother added without missing a beat. "Just be careful, Marissa. Remember your cousin who lost money trying to flip a condo? Don't get in over your head." The conversation shifted quickly, just as it always did, back toward Clarissa, who was already climbing her firm's ranks while engaged to Daniel, a well-respected neurosurgeon. My duplex, my triumph, was dismissed as something silly, risky, a footnote to their golden narrative. But for the first time, I didn't care. Because I finally knew something they didn't. I had a foundation. Maybe a single building, maybe a modest start, but it was mine, and it would grow. And while Clarissa basked in fleeting praise, I was building permanence, brick by brick, lease by lease, decision by decision. The part of me that had always been silent smiled quietly that night. Silence no longer felt like invisibility. Silence was strategy, because my empire was beginning, and none of them saw it coming. The duplex changed everything, not just financially, though the steady income from those tenants erased my fear of missing bills. It changed how I saw myself. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was creating. I had turned my sweat into equity, my determination into property, my silence into strength. While Clarissa's victories were applauded across Thanksgiving tables and Facebook posts, my own accomplishment came to life every month when the rent checks cleared. That duplex wasn't just shelter for 2 families, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't invisible, not to myself, not to the world. And Evelyn? She recognized the fire that had been lit. She pushed me harder than anyone else had ever dared. "You did good on your first one," she told me, walking the freshly painted hallways with her sharp heels clicking against the polished floors. "But don't get sentimental. It's an asset, not a child. Treat it like a business, or the business will eat you alive." Her tone was brisk, but her eyes held pride. She started bringing me into meetings with her network. Contractors, small-time investors, even a few bankers. I was the youngest in every room by decades, and often the only woman. At first, they looked at me like I was tagging along out of curiosity, but when I started asking the right questions, about ROI, about vacancy rates, about zoning changes, they began to notice. Some of them even began to listen. Within a year, Evelyn called me on a Tuesday morning and said casually, "One of my commercial tenants is moving out. I think you should buy the space." My pulse spiked so fast I almost dropped my phone. "Buy? As in me?" "As in you. You've got your duplex as collateral," she said. "I'll co-sign if the bank gets jittery. You want to level up? Here's your shot." It terrified me. It exhilarated me. And I said yes. That's how I acquired my first small office building downtown. Unlike the duplex, I wasn't swinging hammers or painting walls myself this time. Instead, I had to learn the logistics of commercial leases, how to negotiate for new tenants, and how to maintain a building that housed businesses instead of families. Nothing about it was easy, but the profit margins forced me to think bigger. Within 3 years of that first duplex, I owned 5 properties, residential and commercial alike. The rents paid mortgages, and the profits stacked steadily. And then one day, I walked into my job at the real estate brokerage, handed in my resignation, and stepped onto my path as a full-time investor and owner. When I told my parents, they responded predictably. My father frowned. "Are you sure? That seems unstable. You won't have benefits, retirement, any security." My mother chimed in. "Maybe you should keep the job, at least until you meet someone, settle down, and have kids. You don't want to risk too much." Their words stung, but they didn't surprise me. To them, I was still the youngest daughter dabbling in hobbies. To them, my so-called career was play money next to Clarissa's law firm paycheck and her doctor-fiancé's salary. I learned quickly to stop trying to impress them. They didn't want to hear it, so I stopped forcing it. Instead, I poured myself into my company. I managed renovations. I learned to recognize which neighborhoods were about to boom and bought in before the rush. I reinvested everything, living modestly while my peers bought flashy cars. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was building a foundation that couldn't be ignored. And along the way, I began to find relationships that were genuine, built on something far deeper than comparison. The first was Tanya, a graphic designer who rented office space in one of my commercial buildings. She had wild curls, mismatched earrings, and a laugh that filled every room. She took me to art shows, cafe readings, and introduced me to people who didn't care about resumes or job titles. Around her, I felt free for the first time in years. Then there was Louise, a contractor I hired for several renovations. She lived in steel-toed boots and paint-splattered jeans, knew more about wiring than most electricians, and never once treated me like some naive landlord. She respected me because I respected her, and eventually she became more than a contractor. She became a trusted partner on nearly every one of my projects. And finally, there was Daniel. Not my sister's Daniel. Hers was the neurosurgeon. Mine was an architect I met one afternoon at a zoning board hearing. He was quiet, thoughtful, with the kind of mind that saw possibility in empty lots and abandoned buildings. He sketched on napkins, dreamed of mixed-use communities, and believed deeply in the balance of design and function. Like Evelyn had once said of me, where others saw what is, he saw what could be. I knew we spoke the same language. For once, I had people in my life who looked at me directly, who saw me, not my sister's reflection. But there was one more person, years later, who entered at just the right time. Michael. I met him at a real estate investment conference in Boston, and unlike nearly every man I'd dated before, he wasn't intimidated by my ambition. He wasn't trying to compete or outshine me. Instead, he leaned forward across the dinner table during our first date and said something I'd never heard before. Forget the numbers. How did it feel when you got the keys to your first building? No one had ever asked me that, not my family, not even my friends. And so I told him about the fear of that first mortgage, about lying on the bare floor of my duplex the night I bought it, equal parts terrified and thrilled, about the way my hands ached from sanding floors and refinishing stair rails, but how incredible it felt to know every scar had value. And he listened, really listened. Not like someone waiting to speak, not like someone humoring me, but like every word mattered. In the years that followed, he would prove to be both my anchor and my mirror, secure in his own path, proud of mine, never once asking me to shrink so he could stand taller. Unlike my family, he didn't need me to play small. But despite all this growth, every family gathering was still the same. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, the spotlight circled Clarissa. She bragged about the perks of her job, the prestige of her firm, the view from her penthouse. She would tilt her head toward me occasionally with a smile that barely masked her relish. "Oh, you're still doing that little real estate thing, right?" My parents would nod sympathetically, then turn back to her, asking about her latest case or her surgeon husband's important career. Year after year, I sat through it like background furniture. It wasn't bitterness that kept me quiet. It was strategy. Because while they laughed at my silence, I was quietly building an empire. And then came the day that empire expanded in a way none of them could have imagined. The very luxury building where Clarissa and her surgeon husband lived, the one she endlessly flaunted in conversation, hit the market. The owner, an older developer finally ready to retire, wanted out. The property was massive. 12 stories, 120 units, complete with a rooftop pool and concierge services. It was chic, it was in demand, and it was expensive. Too expensive for me alone. But by then, I wasn't alone. I had built partnerships, earned trust, and proved myself to investors who respected my instincts. With their backing, with collateral stacked from my other properties, with Evelyn's stamp of confidence, I made an offer through a shell company. Quiet, anonymous, and they accepted. The day I signed the closing papers, my hands shook just as they had with my very first duplex, but for different reasons. That duplex had been survival. This building? This was power. Not petty revenge, not some childish competition with Clarissa. But power in the purest sense. The knowledge that while everyone laughed at me, I had risen higher than they could see. For over a year, Clarissa bragged about her penthouse without knowing one simple fact. I was the one allowing her to live there. Her landlord, her quiet shadow. And if my parents thought I was invisible before, they had no idea what was coming. The time for silence was nearly over. Owning a duplex had been a challenge. Owning 5 properties had been a grind. Owning a 12-story luxury apartment building with 120 tenants, that was a war. The ink was still drying on the purchase papers when the weight of it hit me. This wasn't just a building, it was a living ecosystem. A staff of 15 employees, from maintenance crews to concierge, dozens of families with high expectations, operating expenses that dwarfed anything I'd ever dealt with before. I thought I knew stress, but those first 6 months proved me wrong. I woke up at 4 a.m. to solve problems I hadn't even known existed. A broken chiller system threatening the entire tower's air conditioning in July. A burst pipe flooding the lobby during business hours. Tenants demanding improvements, investors demanding returns. My inbox was a battlefield, and my phone never stopped ringing. But amid the chaos, I thrived. Every crisis was another piece of education, another step toward mastery. And I wasn't alone. I had built a team around me. A property management company I trusted kept the day-to-day operations running smoothly while I studied the financials, made long-term plans, and decided where upgrades would yield the most value. Quietly, strategically, I improved everything. The outdated gym was upgraded with new machines. Security cameras were replaced with top-of-the-line systems. Hallways received tasteful modern lighting that brightened every floor. The lobby, once sterile and bland, was redesigned into something luxurious. Marble floors, warm tones, art that reflected the city's culture. Even the pool deck received new loungers and landscaping. Residents noticed all of it. Praise filtered in through surveys and reviews, and the property's reputation grew stronger by the month. The rents went up. The value of the building rose by nearly 12% in the first year, and my investors smiled. But the sweetest irony wasn't in the numbers. It was sitting at Sunday family dinners, listening to Clarissa brag about her penthouse. "The new owner must really know what they're doing," she said once, swirling her wine glass with absent elegance. "They finally hired a management company that has standards. The lighting in our hallway makes such a difference. And they're even talking about renovating the pool area next summer. About time, don't you think?" "That sounds wonderful," my mother replied, fussing with a napkin. "You and Daniel deserve the best, darling." I hid a quiet smile behind my water glass. They were praising my decisions without even realizing it. Every improvement Clarissa flaunted was a choice I had personally signed off on. But still, I said nothing. Not yet. Michael, of course, was less patient. One evening, while we cooked dinner in my townhouse kitchen, he leaned against the counter and said, "Why don't you just tell them? Why let her sit there bragging when you could end the conversation with a single sentence?" I shook my head, chopping onions with deliberate focus. "Because it's not the right time. If I blurt it out, it'll just get dismissed like everything else I've ever achieved. I don't want them twisting it into something it's not." "Like what?" "Like revenge. Like petty sibling rivalry. Like I bought a $30 million building just to spite my sister. I need them to see it for what it really is. Proof that while they ignored me, I was building everything on my own." Michael tilted his head, studying me. "So you're waiting for the perfect moment." "Exactly. That moment would arrive sooner than I ever expected. But before it did, the family gatherings became increasingly unbearable. Clarissa never grew tired of her role as the star. At my cousin's baby shower, she interrupted my conversation about a community housing project to announce her upcoming vacation to the Maldives. "It's so elite," she gushed loudly. "The resort only accepts a limited number of high-profile professionals to protect privacy. Daniel and I are lucky we qualify." The implication was clear. She was rarefied, exceptional. I was ordinary. As always, my parents ate up every detail, their questions about amenities and beaches drowning out my commentary on the redevelopment project I was funding downtown. It wasn't just slight irritation anymore, it was hostility. Clarissa's digs, once subtle, became sharper. When I received an award from the local business association for contributions to community development, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, those groups hand out certificates for anything. Daniel just got recognized by the National Surgeons Association. Now that's something." My father beamed at the comparison. My mother nodded in satisfaction. Their dynamic never changed. Clarissa on a pedestal, me as an afterthought. And yet, behind the curtain, I was holding the strings none of them could see until the reports started coming in. As the building owner, I received monthly financial summaries. Usually they were routine: rental income, staff payroll, expense breakdowns. But tucked near the bottom of the report one month was something that made my eyes widen. Clarissa and Daniel had been late on their rent. Once, then twice. Then 3 months in a row. The irony nearly took my breath away. My sister, who mocked my career as some little real estate hustle, was living in a penthouse owned by me and couldn't even pay rent on time. I instructed my management company to send the standard reminders, no exceptions, but I told them not to escalate yet. Handle the tenants like any other, I said, my voice steady. But don't move to formal notices just yet. The truth was, part of me pitied her, and part of me wanted to wait. Clarissa wasn't the type to admit struggle. Eventually, she would brag again about her pristine lifestyle, and when the truth came out, that it was me granting her leniency on those payments, the humiliation would sting worse than any late fee ever could. Meanwhile, my own career was reaching national attention. A prominent real estate journal listed me in their Top 30 Under 40 feature. My profile sprawled across a glossy page, detailing my business model, buying undervalued properties, reinvesting profits, and prioritizing sustainable development. They photographed me against one of my mixed-use projects downtown, sunlight catching the edges of the glass windows behind me. I brought a copy of the magazine to Sunday dinner, discreetly placing it on the coffee table. My aunt spotted it first. "Marissa, is this you? On the cover of a magazine?" she exclaimed, but before anyone could say more, my mother reached for a distraction. "Clarissa, dear, tell everyone about the gala you're chairing next month." The magazine was forgotten in a pile of newspapers, my achievements discarded once again. I burned inside but said nothing. Later, when I found the magazine buried under unopened mail, Michael's words came back to me. "Why don't you tell them?" I was beginning to see he had a point. The tension between my hidden empire and my family's ignorance grew sharper every day. Clarissa boasted, "My parents enabled me, I endured." Meanwhile, the stack of notices about late rent piled higher on my desk. I thought I would be the one to decide when to reveal my truth, but as it turned out, fate had other plans. My father's 60th birthday dinner was fast approaching, an elaborate affair at one of Providence's most exclusive restaurants. My mother reserved a private dining room, invited extended relatives, family, friends, nearly 20 people. Clarissa, of course, planned to make her big entrance in a designer dress with Daniel on her arm. It was supposed to be a celebration of my father's life, his career, everything he had built, but it would become something far different. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner would be the breaking point, the moment my silence ended, the moment I looked my family in the eye and forced them to face the truth they'd ignored for a lifetime. And when I finally spoke, nothing between us would ever be the same. The night of my father's 60th birthday, Charleston's streets gleamed with rain that had passed only an hour earlier. The city lights reflected in slick pavement, and as I walked through the doors of Maison Laurier, the exclusive French restaurant my mother had managed to book 3 months in advance, I paused to steady myself. I wore a navy dress simple in cut, elegant in its understatement, paired with my grandmother's pearl earrings. I hadn't dressed to impress anyone at that table. I had dressed like an armor, a quiet reminder to myself that I belonged in any room I entered. Inside the private dining room, the scene was arranged like a stage play. My parents stood near the center, greeting guests as though they were minor celebrities, their polished smiles as tight as the wine glasses they clinked. Family friends milled about, offering congratulations. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins. They were all there, buzzing with conversation. I had placed my gift carefully on the table earlier, a rare first edition copy of one of my father's favorite detective novels, the one he had loved when I was a little girl and used to read aloud to me before bedtime, before Clarissa's achievements became the family's only topic. That book was more than a gift. It was a reminder that once upon a time, I had shared something with him. I found my assigned seat at the far end of the table, tucked away like a background character in a play I had never been invited to star in. I told myself I wouldn't take it personally. I had done this my whole life. Guests arrived in clusters. My parents greeted each warmly, their glasses of Cabernet swirling as they accepted compliments and well wishes. And then, of course, Clarissa appeared, always the last to enter, always demanding the spotlight without saying a word. She swept into the room in a fitted crimson gown that hugged her like she'd been stitched into it. Daniel trailed behind, handsome in his tailored suit, his surgeon's hands folded casually behind his back. Together they moved as if they owned the air itself. My father's face lit up when he saw her. "There she is," he said, kissing her cheek. My girl. Not one of my girls. Always my girl. I lowered my eyes to the tablecloth, steadying my breath. Dinner began like all the others. Appetizers were served, wine poured, conversations flowing. My father regaled guests with stories of his accounting career, laughing modestly at the praise. My mother chirped in with gossip from their circle. Clarissa dominated as usual, discussing Daniel's promotion to department head and her latest courtroom victories. Whenever I found a moment to speak, mentioning, for instance, the downtown redevelopment I was spearheading into affordable housing and green space, I was swiftly overridden. That's nice. Dear, my mother said lightly, waving a hand. Clarissa, tell everyone about the hospital gala you're chairing. And just like that, my words faded from the room as though I hadn't spoken at all. I sipped my water. Calm on the outside, fire building quietly inside, but the explosion came during dessert. As waiters set down delicate chocolate soufflés, I noticed Clarissa scanning me with that scrutinizing stare she had perfected since we were kids. Her eyes flicked to the subtle Cartier watch on my wrist, a gift I had bought myself after my last acquisition, my first ever luxury purchase. Then to the car keys I'd set briefly on the table, to the sleek sedan parked outside. Her lips curled into the faintest smirk. Nice watch, Marissa, she said, her tone carrying just enough sugar to sting. Business must be good. I saw you pull up in a new car too. Splurging a little, are we? I remained still, giving nothing away. She turned immediately to the table, her voice louder now, pitched to ensure everyone heard. Speaking of money, you wouldn't believe what happened to us. The building management just sent notice. Our rent is increasing next month to $5,800. Can you imagine? For a penthouse that's already sky-high expensive? The table buzzed with sympathetic chuckles. My uncle joked, well, you can't live like royalty without royal expenses. My mother added warmly, perhaps Daniel should speak with the building's owner. Surely they could make accommodations for someone of his status. And then the knife slipped in. Clarissa smiled directly at me, eyes gleaming with amusement. That's probably more than Marissa makes in a whole month with her little real estate hustle. Honestly, I bet her entire building wouldn't cost half our rent. The laughter was sharp this time, bouncing off wine glasses and silver cutlery, filling the room with its cruel echo. My parents didn't laugh, but they didn't stop it either. They smiled, tacitly approving. Their silence cut like it always had. For decades, I had swallowed that silence. Tonight, I didn't. Calmly, deliberately, I set my fork down. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. But my voice came out steady. Actually, I said softly, but the sound carried. Conversation stilled. All eyes turned. I'm quite familiar with that building. Clarissa rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Because you work in real estate. Don't embarrass yourself, Marissa. This is out of your league. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady on hers. No, because I own it. The room turned to ice. A stunned, heavy silence fell so hard it felt like gravity shifted. Clarissa blinked once, twice, thrown off her balance in a way I had never seen before. What did you just say? She demanded. The building, I said, voice level. 12 stories. 120 units. Rooftop pool. Concierge. 18 months ago, I bought it through my company. I am your landlord. I slid my phone across the table, the screen already open to the ownership records. Her manicured hands snatched it, skimming frantically. The color drained from her face. Daniel leaned in, jaw tightening as he studied the documents. His voice, normally confident, came out low and uneasy. These look legitimate. My father adjusted his glasses, his hand trembling slightly as he took the phone. Marissa, he said, his voice more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. What is this? Exactly what I told you, I replied coolly. While everyone here was busy admiring Clarissa, I was building something real. I've owned your penthouse, Clarissa, for 1.5 years. The rent increase you're complaining about, that was my decision. And if you think it's unfair, you can take it up with my management company, like any other tenant. My mother's voice broke the silence, high and sharp. But how? That building must be worth millions. 28.5 million, I said evenly. And yes, I could afford it. Because while you were mocking my hustle, I was creating an empire. It was too much for Clarissa. She shoved back her chair, her voice rising. You're lying. This is some pathetic stunt, Marissa, to steal attention at Dad's dinner. You always wanted pity, and now you're— Enough! Daniel snapped suddenly, cutting her off. His tone shocked even me. He turned to her, still holding my phone. These are real. She's telling the truth. Clarissa froze, her face twisting into disbelief and fury. The table blurred around me. Whispers, awkward coughs, relatives excusing themselves suddenly to the restroom. Somewhere in it all, my father cleared his throat, his face pink with embarrassment. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Marissa, not here. Why not? The words left my mouth sharp as glass. Clarissa brought it up, mocking me publicly. I'm simply returning the courtesy, with the truth. My parents bristled. My mother reached for Clarissa's shoulder, her voice brittle. Marissa, this reeks of jealousy. We have always supported you both equally. My laugh cut through her words. Short, bitter, cold. Equally? When Clarissa went to law school, you took out a second mortgage to pay her tuition. When I was accepted into business school, I was handed a loan application. When Clarissa bought her first car, you helped with the down payment. When I renovated my first property, by myself, with my own hands, Dad told me I was being reckless. When Clarissa got married, you spent $70,000 on her wedding. When I was featured in a national magazine, you hid it under the mail and changed the subject to her gala. My voice shook now, not from fear, but from years of words unsaid finally forcing themselves out. Don't you dare stand there and tell me it was equal. Don't insult me like that! Clarissa's voice cracked, shrill. So you admit it. You only bought the building to humiliate me. You obsessed freak. I stood then, my chair scraping with a screech that cut across the table. No, I bought it because it was a wise investment. You just happened to be a tenant, a coincidence I barely thought twice about. But you couldn't stop mocking me, couldn't stop reminding everyone how much better you thought you were. And now look where we are. I gathered my purse, my jacket, my dignity. I turned to my father, his eyes wide, his expression faltering. Happy birthday, Dad, my gift is on the table. I thought you might remember reading those detective novels with me, before it all became about Clarissa. And then I walked out, past the frozen faces, past the whispering room, past the maître d' who opened the door in stunned silence. Out into the cool Charleston night, where the damp air hit my skin like a baptism. My hands shook as I fumbled for my car keys. My chest burned. For decades I had swallowed anger, tucked it deep inside. Tonight it erupted, unstoppable. I drove 2 blocks before I pulled over and sobbed into the steering wheel, my whole body trembling. I had spoken the truth, finally. And no matter how messy the fallout, nothing would ever be the same. The night after my father's 60th birthday dinner, I didn't sleep. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the nightstand. Calls from my parents, texts from Clarissa that alternated between accusations and demands, voicemails from relatives caught in the middle. The screen glowed like an angry lighthouse in the dark. I silenced it and stared at the ceiling, the stillness of my townhouse pressing in like a weighted blanket. For 34 years, I had bitten my tongue, endured the silence, accepted my role as the invisible child. Last night, in one sentence, I burned that script to ash. Now all that was left was the smoke. By morning, the texts had grown frantic. Clarissa's messages blared across my screen. You humiliated me in front of our entire family. You're a sick person to keep it secret just to ambush me. You're lying. There's no way the building is yours. Followed by a photo of the rent increase letter she had mocked at dinner. Rescind this now. If you had any decency, you'd let family slide. Her anger rolled in waves, but underneath all of it was a truth I could read between the lines. Fear. She was embarrassed, unsteady, unable to reconcile her image of me with the reality in front of her. My parents weren't much better. My mother's voicemail dripped with ice. Your father and I are both very upset. You've taken a family celebration and turned it into a spectacle. Whatever grievances you've been carrying, that was not the time or the place. My father's message was more restrained, but no less cutting. Marissa, please. You've misunderstood us all these years. We've always been proud of both our daughters. Perhaps we paid more attention to Clarissa because her career paths were familiar to us. But you have to admit, the way you conducted yourself last night was Unbecoming. Call us so we can smooth this over. Unbecoming. The word stuck in my throat like ash. I answered neither of them. Instead, I called Michael. He came over that evening with takeout Thai food and a steady quiet. We ate on the couch, the room heavy with the kind of silence that isn't empty, but protective. He let me vent, his presence grounding me. I feel like I just set off a bomb, I admitted finally. My chopsticks hung limp between my fingers, like I took decades of silence and turned it into shrapnel that hit everyone at once. I don't know if I feel relieved or guilty. Maybe both. Michael placed his hand over mine. Both can be true. You didn't start that war, Marissa. You spoke a truth that was long overdue. Their reaction says more about them than about you. But my family's silence had always been my scar. And scars don't fade overnight. The following week, I pushed all personal distractions aside and immersed myself in the business. I instructed my management company to handle all communication with Clarissa and Daniel, exactly like any other tenant. No special exceptions, no favors, no back channels. They had been late on rent 3 months running. Protocol was protocol. When I read the next month's report, their payment had finally gone through on time. But a few weeks later, a letter arrived, notice to vacate. Clarissa and Daniel weren't renewing their lease. They had found another luxury building across town. My mother called not long after, her voice sharp as a blade. I hope you're satisfied. You've driven your sister out of her home. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone harder to my ear like pressure could somehow shield me. I didn't drive her anywhere. She chose not to pay market rate. That was her decision. Don't be cruel, Marissa! Families help each other. What does it matter if she was late a few times? She is your sister. I cut her off. For 8 years, I worked 3 jobs in college because you said I needed to learn responsibility. When Clarissa was accepted into law school, you called it an investment. For me, it was responsibility. I don't get to change the rules just because she can't keep up her lifestyle. I treat her like every other tenant. Nothing more, nothing less. There was silence on the other end. Then came the familiar, exasperated sigh I'd known since childhood. The sigh that said, Marissa, you will never measure up in the way I want. She hung up without another word, and yet a strange peace flowed through me. For the first time, I wasn't begging to be understood. I wasn't twisting myself into knots to earn recognition that never came. I was holding my ground. 6 months passed. During that time, Clarissa and Daniel moved to their sparkling new condo. The penthouse left behind didn't sit empty for long. A pair of entrepreneurs signed a lease almost immediately, accepting the rent increase without complaint. Within weeks, their checks cleared, their move-in went smoothly, and life carried on. Meanwhile, I flourished. My downtown community development project broke ground. Bulldozers roared across an old warehouse district, transforming barren lots into the beginnings of affordable housing, green space, and family shops. That project was my pride, the kind of legacy Clarissa mocked, but entire neighborhoods needed. On opening day, a ribbon-cutting ceremony drew city officials, investors, and journalists. I stood at the center with scissors in hand, cameras flashing. As the ribbon fluttered down, applause swelled, genuine and unfiltered, not forced or stolen by someone else. For once, I didn't feel like the invisible child. I was the one being seen. And in the crowd, by the edge near the shade of a tree, I spotted someone familiar. My father. He wasn't smiling, but his presence was enough to make my breath hitch. When the ceremony ended, he approached me slowly, hands folded in front of him, looking older than I'd ever noticed before. "This is impressive," he said at last, gesturing toward the site behind me. "The integration of green space. You thought of community needs as well as profit. That's thoughtful." It was the first time in my life my father had ever spoken to me about my work with genuine interest. It wasn't a dismissal, wasn't a sidestep, wasn't a patronizing pat on the head. It was real. "Thank you," I managed, though my throat tightened unexpectedly. We walked together to a quieter corner. For the first time, his polished demeanor cracked. He admitted he had been seeing a therapist since the dinner. That he had started reviewing tapes of family moments, old emails, photographs. "At first I thought you exaggerated," he confessed, shame flickering across his face. But then I saw it. The way we paraded Clarissa. The way we minimized you. It wasn't intentional, Marissa, but it was real. And I'm sorry. Decades of longing collided inside me. Pain, relief, disbelief. A small crack had appeared in the wall that had always kept me out. My mother, however, clung to her denial. Clarissa reinforced it daily. They told each other stories where I was bitter, jealous, manipulative. Maybe it comforted them. Maybe it excused their choices. I realized, standing there with my father, that I no longer needed all of them to see me. If just one of them did, even a little, it was enough of a start. And at home, Michael waited with patience that felt like a balm. He never tried to fix my family for me. He just reminded me, night after night, that the family we build for ourselves can matter more than the one we were born into. I wasn't healed overnight. The echoes of their laughter at that dinner still stung when I remembered it. But slowly, the sting lessened. Slowly, I understood. That confrontation hadn't broken me. It had freed me. In the weeks after the confrontation, my phone lit up less. The frenzy of furious texts eased. The missed calls dwindled. Where there had once been firestorms of words, only silence remained. But for the first time in my life, that silence didn't wound me. It liberated me. It wasn't imposed on me anymore. I chose it. Clarissa and Daniel had moved on into their new glass and steel condo across town, complete with staged photos of pristine furniture and rooftop cocktails plastered on her social media. My parents praised their fresh start, pretending the rent debacle had never occurred. I was erased again from their conversations, but instead of shrinking under that erasure, I found my shoulders lighter. I didn't have to sit at dinner tables absorbing mockery or waiting for recognition that never came. I had my own table now. And at that table were people who really listened when I spoke. Michael was at the center of it. His quiet faith in me had carried me through nights when my resolve faltered. And now that the confrontation was over, he didn't gloat or say, "I told you so." He simply stepped into the calm, anchoring me with his steady presence. One night, as we walked hand in hand through a redevelopment site that was just starting to take shape, I caught him studying me under the glow of a half-strung work light. Concrete dust was scattered like sand across the pavement. Paint rollers propped in buckets leaned against steel posts, and beyond us, the skeletal framework of buildings that would one day hold families, shops and children playing in courtyards. "You don't even realize it, do you?" he said softly. "Realize what? You've become what you always deserved to be, visible, not just in your work, in yourself." I opened my mouth to brush it off, but for once I didn't. For once, I let myself believe it. As the months passed, my life grew not just in square footage and investment numbers, but in meaning. I had reached a point where money no longer dictated survival. It enabled vision. With Michael's encouragement, I shifted focus toward projects that mattered, rehabilitating neglected blocks, creating mixed-use spaces where small businesses could thrive, setting aside units for affordable housing instead of maximizing profit. Not everyone understood why I left some money on the table, but the joy came from watching communities flourish, not just balance sheets. Evelyn, sharp as ever, clinked her coffee mug against mine one morning when I met her at her office. "You're doing what I hoped you would, kid. You're not just playing the game, you're rewriting it." Her words stayed with me. More than profit, more than prestige. I wanted to leave something behind that proved the overlooked could rise. That invisibility didn't mean insignificance. But despite everything, old scars tugged at me. When my father reached out, tentatively asking to meet for lunch, I agreed. We sat in a quiet corner of a seafood restaurant near the harbor, the tang of salt air drifting in on the breeze. He looked tired, though lighter somehow, as though admitting the truth had peeled back years of denial. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, pushing his plate aside, half-eaten. "And I can't speak for your mother. She holds on to her version like it's rope keeping her from drowning. But Marissa, I see now, I do, and I regret it." For years I had fantasized about hearing those words. In reality, they didn't land with triumphant satisfaction. They landed with a quiet ache, the kind you feel over a wound that should never have existed in the first place. Still, it mattered. One parent out of two had finally looked at me fully, without comparison. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And honestly, I didn't need more. Michael's support deepened through it all. Where my family dismissed me, he celebrated me. Where they competed and compared, He collaborated. He never asked me to mute myself, never warned me that my ambition was too much. And perhaps most importantly, he never once used my success as a way to measure himself. On a crisp autumn weekend, he invited me to visit a coastal town 2 hours away. The streets were lined with clapboard houses and boats bobbed in the marina, gulls cutting across the silver sky. As we watched the sun sink into the Atlantic, Michael turned toward me, his expression tinged with the kind of vulnerability I cherished in him. "I love your ambition," he said quietly, "and your compassion, and your strength. I don't want to walk behind you or in front of you. I want to walk beside you, always." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He slipped a small box from his pocket, opening it to a ring that wasn't ostentatious, but perfect, subtle, elegant, chosen for me, not for show. "Marissa Lane," he asked, "will you build a life with me?" My heartbeat was thunder in my chest, but my answer came without hesitation. Yes, yes to him, yes to us. Yes to choosing a family of my own. Our wedding wasn't a spectacle designed for social media. It was small, intimate, surrounded by the friends who had stood by me not because of status or because they were expected to, but because they loved me for me. Tanya laughed through her champagne toast. Louise gave us a reclaimed wood table she and I had sanded together during a renovation, saying, "Every meal you eat here, remember the work you've already done, and the work still worth doing." Evelyn squeezed my hands with surprising gentleness. "I never had children," she whispered. "But you've been as close as one." When I looked around that day, I realized something monumental. I didn't miss the absence of my mother or Clarissa. My father came alone, awkward in his suit, but he was there. He watched me with quiet pride, eyes glassy when I caught him mid-smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For the first time in my life, I wasn't longing for the family that ignored me. I was present in the family I had chosen. After the wedding, Michael and I poured ourselves into the future, not just for us, but for others. I expanded my real estate mentorship program for young women. Every girl who walked through those doors with doubt in her eyes reminded me of myself at 19, filing away papers in Richard's cramped office. I made this vow. No one would walk out of my office overlooked. Not on my watch. It would have been easy to sink into bitterness toward Clarissa and my mother, to replay the unfairness endlessly. But therapy taught me an essential truth. Waiting for validation from those unwilling to give it would only keep me chained to the same silence I despised. Letting go wasn't weakness, it was self-preservation. And so, step by step, I loosened my grip on their approval. And in doing so, I discovered something extraordinary. I didn't need it anymore. When Clarissa's world appeared flawless from the outside, I let her keep the illusion. When my mother continued to sigh on the phone about my choices, I simply ended the call gently, without anger, without despair. Their shadows no longer loomed over me, because the truth was, my victory had never really been about owning Clarissa's building. That was irony, yes, and satisfaction, but not the real triumph. The real triumph was in this. I had learned to build a life so sturdy, so rooted in my own worth, that when they tried to minimize me, the echo no longer reached me. For Clarissa, life was still about how others perceived her. For me, life had finally become about how I perceived myself. And for the first time, that was enough. In the weeks after the confrontation, my phone lit up less. The frenzy of furious texts eased. The missed calls dwindled. Where there had once been firestorms of words, only silence remained. But for the first time in my life, that silence didn't wound me. It liberated me. It wasn't imposed on me anymore. I chose it. Clarissa and Daniel had moved on into their new glass and steel condo across town, complete with staged photos of pristine furniture and rooftop cocktails plastered on her social media. My parents praised their fresh start, pretending the rent debacle had never occurred. I was erased again from their conversations, but instead of shrinking under that erasure, I found my shoulders lighter. I didn't have to sit at dinner tables absorbing mockery or waiting for recognition that never came. I had my own table now, and at that table were people who really listened when I spoke. Michael was at the center of it. His quiet faith in me had carried me through nights when my resolve faltered. And now that the confrontation was over, He didn't gloat or say, "I told you so." He simply stepped into the calm, anchoring me with his steady presence. One night, as we walked hand in hand through a redevelopment site that was just starting to take shape, I caught him studying me under the glow of a half-strung work light. Concrete dust was scattered like sand across the pavement. Paint rollers propped in buckets leaned against steel posts. And beyond us, the skeletal framework of buildings that would one day hold families, shops, and children playing in courtyards. "You don't even realize it, do you?" he said softly. "Realize what?" "You've become what you always deserved to be. Visible. Not just in your work. In yourself." I opened my mouth to brush it off, but for once I didn't. For once I let myself believe it. As the months passed, my life grew not just in square footage and investment numbers, but in meaning. I had reached a point where money no longer dictated survival. It enabled vision. With Michael's encouragement, I shifted focus toward projects that mattered. Rehabilitating neglected blocks, creating mixed-use spaces where small businesses could thrive, setting aside units for affordable housing instead of maximizing profit. Not everyone understood why I left some money on the table, but the joy came from watching communities flourish, not just balance sheets. Evelyn, sharp as ever, clinked her coffee mug against mine one morning when I met her at her office. "You're doing what I hoped you would, kid. You're not just playing the game, you're rewriting it." Her words stayed with me. More than profit, more than prestige, I wanted to leave something behind that proved the overlooked could rise. That invisibility didn't mean insignificance. But despite everything, old scars tugged at me. When my father reached out, tentatively asking to meet for lunch, I agreed. We sat in a quiet corner of a seafood restaurant near the harbor, the tang of salt air drifting in on the breeze. He looked tired, though lighter somehow, as though admitting the truth had peeled back years of denial. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, pushing his plate aside half-eaten. "And I can't speak for your mother. She holds on to her version like it's rope keeping her from drowning. But Marissa, I see now, I do, and I regret it." For years I had fantasized about hearing those words. In reality, they didn't land with triumphant satisfaction. They landed with a quiet ache, the kind you feel over a wound that should never have existed in the first place. Still, it mattered. One parent out of two had finally looked at me fully, without comparison. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And honestly, I didn't need more. Michael's support deepened through it all. Where my family dismissed me, he celebrated me. Where they competed and compared, he collaborated. He never asked me to mute myself, never warned me that my ambition was too much. And perhaps most importantly, he never once used my success as a way to measure himself. On a crisp autumn weekend, he invited me to visit a coastal town 2 hours away. The streets were lined with clapboard houses and boats bobbed in the marina, gulls cutting across the silver sky. As we watched the sun sink into the Atlantic, Michael turned toward me, his expression tinged with the kind of vulnerability I cherished in him. "I love your ambition," he said quietly, "and your compassion, and your strength. I don't want to walk behind you or in front of you. I want to walk beside you. Always." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He slipped a small box from his pocket, opening it to a ring that wasn't ostentatious, but perfect, subtle, elegant, chosen for me, not for show. "Marissa Lane," he asked, "will you build a life with me?" My heartbeat was thunder in my chest, but my answer came without hesitation. Yes, yes to him, yes to us. Yes to choosing a family of my own. Our wedding wasn't a spectacle designed for social media. It was small, intimate, surrounded by the friends who had stood by me not because of status or because they were expected to, but because they loved me for me. Tanya laughed through her champagne toast. Louise gave us a reclaimed wood table she and I had sanded together during a renovation, saying, "Every meal you eat here, remember the work you've already done, and the work still worth doing." Evelyn squeezed my hands with surprising gentleness. "I never had children," she whispered. "But you've been as close as one." When I looked around that day, I realized something monumental. I didn't miss the absence of my mother or Clarissa. My father came alone, awkward in his suit, but he was there. He watched me with quiet pride, eyes glassy when I caught him mid-smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For the first time in my life, I wasn't longing for the family that ignored me. I was present in the family I had chosen. After the wedding, Michael and I poured ourselves into the future, not just for us, but for others. I expanded my real estate mentorship program for young women. Every girl who walked through those doors with doubt in her eyes reminded me of myself at 19, filing away papers in Richard's cramped office. I made this vow. No one would walk out of my office overlooked. Not on my watch. It would have been easy to sink into bitterness toward Clarissa and my mother, to replay the unfairness endlessly. But therapy taught me an essential truth. Waiting for validation from those unwilling to give it would only keep me chained to the same silence I despised. Letting go wasn't weakness, it was self-preservation. And so, step by step, I loosened my grip on their approval. And in doing so, I discovered something extraordinary. I didn't need it anymore. When Clarissa's world appeared flawless from the outside, I let her keep the illusion. When my mother continued to sigh on the phone about my choices, I simply ended the call gently, without anger, without despair. Their shadows no longer loomed over me. Because the truth was, my victory had never really been about owning Clarissa's building. That was irony, yes, and satisfaction, but not the real triumph. The real triumph was in this. I had learned to build a life so sturdy, so rooted in my own worth, that when they tried to minimize me, the echo no longer reached me. For Clarissa, life was still about how others perceived her. For me, life had finally become about how I perceived myself, and for the first time that was enough. Years passed after that dinner that had changed everything. Seasons turned, buildings rose, investors came and went, but the truth remained. I had freed myself. Clarissa never acknowledged it outright. She and Daniel carried on with curated social media highlight reels of their lives, exotic vacations, designer furniture, cocktails on terraces that weren't mine this time. Her posts were polished, but beneath them I could still hear the strain, the late rent, the desperate insistence that appearances must hold, the quiet cracks they fought to plaster over. My mother fueled her still, telling her she was the crown jewel, reinforcing the narrative they had clung to all their lives. And that was fine. For once, I didn't need them to change, because I had changed. My father and I built something soft and tentative, like fragile glass you carry carefully in both hands. He came to my openings, asked thoughtful questions, sometimes sent me clippings of industry articles I knew he'd never have read before. He wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect him to be. But he looked at me now, not through me, not past me. And after 34 years, that was enough. Michael and I flourished together. Our townhouse filled with life. Plants stretching towards sunlight. A dog we adopted snoring against the couch. Laughter echoing across hardwood floors at midnight dinners eaten barefoot after long days on construction sites. We built not just homes, but home itself. It was joy without comparison. Love without conditions. My mentorship program expanded into an annual scholarship for young women entering real estate. Watching their eyes when they received their first set of keys brought me a satisfaction money could never buy. Every time I passed a building with lights glowing in tenanted windows, I smiled, not at ownership, but at legacy. At proof that invisible girls grow into visible women when they learn to clap for themselves. 1 year to the day after that fateful birthday dinner, I stood on the rooftop of one of my newest properties, staring at the city skyline bathed in twilight. Wind blew through my hair, the smell of rain hinting at the horizon. For the first time, I thought back on the laughter that once cut straight into my bones, the silence that had pierced me deeper than words, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude, because if they had cheered for me when I was younger, I might never have learned to cheer for myself. If they had handed me advantages, I might never have built the resilience that became my strength. If they had treated me equally, I might never have discovered the freedom in choosing myself without apology. In their neglect, they had unknowingly given me the gift of independence. In their favoritism, they had sharpened me into someone who didn't break when ignored, but thrived in silence and grew unseen, until the moment came to step fully into the light. So the story wasn't really about vengeance. It wasn't about proving them wrong, though I had. It was about finally proving myself right. If you've ever wondered whether your worth is diminished just because no one in your family notices it, let me be living proof. It isn't. Your story matters, even when theirs drowns out your voice. Your victories matter, even if no one claps. And if you keep building, keep moving forward, one day your truth will stand so tall it won't need anyone else's recognition. It will speak for itself. That night, standing on that rooftop, I whispered out loud, not for anyone listening, but for myself. I am not invisible anymore. And the city lights answered back. If my journey resonated with you, if you've ever fought to prove yourself when no one believed in you, hit that subscribe button, give this story a like, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their worth does not depend on anyone else's approval. Because sometimes, the family you choose and the life you build for yourself shines brighter than the one you were born into. Thank you for listening.